Starship Test. This is test number 2. Most people probably remember the first one, big explosions, concrete all over the place, that sort of thing. There was a long wait for approvals, Fish and Wildlife actually being the last one. Finally, they got all that, and they launched on November 18th. Some of this got misrepresented. The plan was never to actually go into orbit. They went into space, and they got very close to orbital speed, but they didn't want to go quite all the way. They wanted to just end up landing near Hawaii. They didn't get quite that far, but even getting as far as they did was actually more than they expected necessarily. So they did achieve their major goals. A lot of these actually go back to fixing the deficiencies noted on the very first test. The first thing is the launch pad itself. They call it stage 0. As you recall, it did not stand up to the wrath of all those engines. So they'd installed this water cooling mechanism, which did a lot of things. Basically, it absorbs a lot of heat by vaporizing the water. It breaks up standing sound waves by the fact that there's all these different levels of humidity in the steam bubbles. And as a result, it breaks up the sound. The net result was minimal damage. The problem can be fixed pretty quickly and would probably be typical in a lot of launches. The next thing is that all the engines did work this time. They didn't work last time. This time they all did. Actually, both on the first and the second stage. Yeah.
Just a reminder, that SpaceX rocket is taller than a Saturn V rocket and more powerful than Saturn V rockets. That's what is taking off.
Okay, you have been warned. Okay, if you've watched any of this, they show you a lot of information on these displays. Like this display down here is telling you what engines are firing in the booster. Yeah.
Short question. Wasn't this design on the engines that the Russians were using back when they were trying to go to the moon, and it didn't work?
The pattern, yeah, the
pattern.
M1.
Oh, you're talking about the
multitude of
that pattern of engines with the same style that failed, and they gave up.
They gave it up, yeah.
Well, yeah, they had 30 engines on the first stage, and they did not have real good computer control back in those days, and it caused problems when some of the engines started to back surge and chug. It caused another engine way on the other side to start going crazy, and then everything just went.
I thought it was a very interesting history. That's right.
It is. Yeah, there's much tighter control on all these things now. Well, and they made a lot of improvements. I mean, for instance, in the previous generation, it was all hydraulic controls, and there was a common failure mode that if you lost your hydraulics, you pretty much lost all your gimbal and your ability to move the engines around. So a lot of things got fixed up between version 1 and version 2.
I didn't mean to slow you down, but I thought.
Oh no, this is a lot of interesting stuff that that happened here. There isn't time to go over all of it, but there's an amazing amount of stuff that they do. They always say like 1,000 changes or whatever, in each one, all small incremental changes. I mean, even the engines got upgraded to slightly better versions than what they had before. They put in better separation between the engines so that if one of them caught on fire or blew up or something, it wouldn't necessarily stop the rest of them. They could lose 1 or even 2 engines and still make it to orbit. And, they show you the altitude and so on, rounded off, obviously. It's obviously more than 0 at this point. Okay, continuing on to the major goals. A big thing was they changed the way they're separating the stages. The first time what they were planning on doing was essentially just rotating everything and letting things spin apart. They never actually quite got to that the last time around because they weren't at the point where it's time to separate. But anyway, they went to a new method where they just fire the engines of the second stage while the first stage is still running. Now, they do cut it back. They cut back to 3 booster engines. And then they start up stage 2, and then they separate. And they claim, 10% improvement. So anyway, that worked. There's a picture of that. It's probably a little hard to make out. What you're seeing here is the booster to the left-hand side of that, and then you can see the rocket firing of the second stage there. They're up high enough that they're already over at quite an angle. Continuing along, the next step is the booster would flip. In the future is going to be heading back to the launch pad or at least back to somewhere closer to shore. They're called the boostback burn. And so they actually managed to do the flip. That's the first murky picture here where they're starting the flip. The flip is going like 45 degrees at that point, and there's the second stage firing its engines in full. They got all the way over, and they got ignition. You can see a little bit of that. That's just the booster in that middle picture. And then on the far right-hand side, they actually had a couple engines going. But the whole thing only lasted about 7 seconds, and then it blew up. Now, it's unfortunate because, the news says, oh, okay, they had major explosion. Well, actually, any first stage is always toast after it's done. I mean, normally they just fall to earth, and in this case, it happened to blow up. But the main thing is they're making progress. They're getting past just throwing away the stage. They at least managed to flip it and get it coming back, which is what they do with the Falcon 9. I mean, they've got that down, but this is a different set of engines. It's bigger, everything's different, so they're working on that. So anyway, they were actually pretty happy they got as far as they did. I don't think they actually know exactly why the thing blew up. There was a lot of speculation. I mean, some of it's, okay, the fluid's sloshing around, there's that. Maybe just the forces were too strong. I don't think that's it, because the first test showed that the whole thing could flip around multiple times and hold together. So it probably wasn't a structural problem. And of course, there's always the fact that, well, you are blasting the top of the booster with the second stage right before separation. So that could have damaged things to it. They'll sort all that out. So anyway, that's what it looked like. That was the booster exploding. So it broke up, as I said, about 7 seconds in. Everybody seems to think it was the flight termination system that did it, meaning it decided that things were not going well and it blew itself up. And that is what the flight termination system is supposed to do. So actually, I guess we've now tested out that indeed the new flight termination system works. It didn't work on the first one very well. That was considered one of the major problems they really had to fix. So here they've indirectly done a demonstration that flight termination works. Again, the underlying root cause, maybe they don't know that yet. But anyway, the point is, the second stage still took off, from that point, just like any other rocket would have. So they don't feel too bad about that. Continuing along, the second stage fired for another 6 minutes. That was about 3 minutes in when we had that explosion of the booster. But, the second stage had already gone past that. And it ran for about 6 minutes, almost getting to the point where it was supposed to go. They didn't quite get there, and then it blew up. And that, again, probably flight termination system. They don't actually know why, or at least I haven't seen anything yet as to what actually happened here. But that was pretty good. And of course, assuming it was the flight termination system, then again, it's doing what it's supposed to do. We just don't know what decision went into it. The reason they can't tell is they lost telemetry. So there's obviously a problem there. Somehow or other, they weren't getting the data anymore, and so they couldn't even tell what happened. But they got up to about 148 kilometers when they were still getting telemetry, and they were going about 24,000 kilometers an hour. So they're getting pretty close to escape velocity, pretty close to the altitude they wanted anyway. But they didn't get a chance to try out reentry. So that's one big thing that's missing, and that was a stretch goal, which is the next thing. Obviously, they hoped to take the first stage further. They weren't planning on coming back and actually doing a landing, but they were hoping to prove they could control it on the way down. And that was a stretch. They didn't get there because it blew up. The second stage, they wanted reentry at full speed to really get a good test of the thermal protection system, meaning the tiles, basically. These are new tiles, new gluing methods, and so on. And it turned out some of those tiles, not a lot, but some had fallen off, especially along weld lines near the base of the thing. So there's some doubt that it would have survived anyway. There's a lot of debate about that. I was reading that online, and people said, well, you have the stainless steel thing underneath it. You can always lose some tiles, and that was even true for the space shuttle. You could lose some tiles. It depends on where they are. And the good thing is that most of these tiles were just along a cylindrical body. They were not at like a bleeding edge where the air is hitting at supersonic speeds. So they probably could have made it, but we'll never know because the thing blew up. One good thing is that at least given how far they got, the next set of approvals for the next test shouldn't be so hard to get. So they were pretty close. Other space-related videos or slide presentations by me are available at the link shown here. That includes a web page and also a list of videos at my YouTube channel, so you can view them or subscribe for notifications about future videos. These presentations are mostly made as part of the meetings of National Space Society's North Houston chapter, and the link to that is shown. Topics like these are presented as part of a monthly news segment, and there are also lots of other interesting speakers and open discussions. You can attend in person or online via Zoom. Come join us.